I'm Michael Barone. This is Charlie Reed. Now, I don't know Charlie from a hole in the ground, but now I will recognize him henceforth. Are you all friends of Charlie? Raise hands if you guys know this person. Okay. He must be a special fellow. I think he's a special fellow, even having not met him before today, because he claims to be a religious listener to my program, Pipe Dreams. And for a retired pastor to say that he listens religiously to a radio program, he must be very crazy and or very dedicated, because he knows, and I know, and you all may know, or maybe after this afternoon we'll know better, that the organ does speak in a unique way, and the power of its voice, the subtlety of its voice, the nuances of its color continue over hundreds of years to attract our attention, to command our appreciation, to entertain us, to surprise us. It's a nifty instrument. I've never quite understood how I ended up spending as much time as I have with it, but every day I learn something more, I hear something new. It's a continuous surprise and delight, and I expect for Charlie it's been the same. The relationship between pastors and organists, and I'm not in a position to be able to do much of an interview with Charlie, but the relationship between pastors and organists is sometimes a rocky road. Some organists quit their jobs because they can't get along with their pastors. I don't know of any pastor that has quit his job because of an organist, although there should be some balance. But fortunately, there are many organists who get along really well with the pastors of their churches. I'm hoping that was the case with you. He nods yes. So we have to trust him. At his age, he shouldn't be lying, although at his age, he could be making up stories that we would all believe anyway. We have the delight of two exceptional young, relatively speaking, performers for us today. They are stalwarts of the community. Elaine Mann, who is the organist of this church, and Paul Kossawar, who is the emeritus professor of organ at the university here in Eau Claire. And they're going to share some wonderful sounds of the organ here at Grace Church. Do you have a microphone up there? No. So, our first piece is by Adolphus Hailstork, who is a man of color, a man of principle, a man of great talent. We're a little out of season because this toccata is on the Advent hymn, Veni Emmanuel. And we think of the Advent season as one of preparation and of mystery in a way, because this great thing, which is Christmas, is still a little bit down the road. And sometimes O Come, Emmanuel is sung, I don't want to say tentatively, but wistfully and hopefully. Mr. Hailstork's piece leaves no question. He says, "Come, Emmanuel, and you better get here now." Thank you, Elaine. Elaine Mann, resident musician here at Grace Lutheran, knows this organ well and has left no question with Mr. Hailstork's prelude toccata on Veni Emmanuel. Well, we all know how the story ends, or actually how the story continues. Christmas follows shortly thereafter. Next, music of Louis Vierne. It's interesting that we have three French composers on the second, third, and fourth parts of our program, all Catholic. Here we are in a Lutheran church, Lutheran minister, but we're ecumenical. Presbyterian. Okay. I grew up Presbyterian. I'm sort of lapsed. What little I know of good things, I probably learned at the Presbyterian Church. This next piece by Louis Vierne, who was organist for 37 years at Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris. He was famous as a recitalist. He toured in this country briefly, and in fact, he was so smitten by American organs with their combination buttons and easy control of the stops and registration that he hoped to be able to convince the people back in Paris that the Notre Dame organ ought to be altered in that way. It did not happen during his lifetime. Vierne was nearly blind. He had congenital cataracts, and though he had very limited sight, wrote many of his scores in Braille and then would translate them out into huge manuscript pages. He wrote 6 symphonies for the organ. His teacher, Charles-Marie Widor, had shown the way and followed the direction that Widor's predecessor, César Franck, had established. The organs in Paris were expansive and expressive, and composers in the latter part of the 19th century felt that they needed to write a new style, not just chorale preludes, not just preludes and fugues. They needed to write symphonies for the organ. Vierne wrote 6. This is his 4th. It is, in its many other movements, there are 4 others, rather stressed. Vierne had a not completely happy life. You would think that anyone that was appointed organist at Notre Dame Cathedral would feel as though they had arrived. Unfortunately, the relationship between organist and clergy at Notre Dame was not great. Vierne also suffered from his blindness. He had numerous operations on his eyes to try and correct the problems, and they simply made the problems worse, and he would end up spending a year or 2 in rehabilitation. He had lost both a son and his brother in World War I, and then his wife ran off with the guy who he thought was his friend, who was the tuner of the organ at Notre Dame Cathedral. So he had a lot to be grumpy about. And in this 4th symphony, the other movements are, shall we say, stressed and stressful. But this 4th movement, next to last movement, is titled Romance. And I dare say it is one of the most exquisitely beautiful pieces in all of the organ repertoire. And it may be a reminiscence on Vierne's part to the days when he and his wife were in love. Paul Kosower is going to play for us this Romance from Symphony 4 by Vierne. Thank you, Paul. It's an extraordinary piece, thinking about in retrospect how it begins. It's like a little microcosm of the life experience. It begins with this sweet melody. Then in the middle of the piece, things become, as life does, more challenged, more intense, more complex. And it looks as though there are mountains to climb. One gets over those, the transition back to the beautiful melody at the beginning, but the melody now transformed somewhat by the experience of life and ending in exquisite acceptance and peaceful calm. Listening to music is always a challenge. What does the composer want to say? What does the composer say that he doesn't really understand that he's saying? What do we perceive in listening? The next piece is pretty straightforward in that regard. It's a Carillon Postlude by Henri Moulay, who played at the Sacré-Cœur Basilica in Paris on a splendid instrument. Moulay is best known for a collection of pieces known as the Byzantine Sketches, which are kind of tone paintings of various aspects of the Sacré-Cœur Church. This piece stands alone, and it is nothing more than a splendid ringing of the bells. Carillon Sortie by Henri Moulay. Again, Paul Kossower, our soloist this afternoon. Thank you, Paul. Tintinnabulation. He was up in the belfry with the bells there, the organ all around him. When I was contacted by Mosaic Dreams, I think the original idea that Jennifer had was that she wanted to know if there were any organ concerts going on in the area that you could be taken to. There weren't. And then we got putting pieces together and thought, maybe we can put something and have it happen and have you come, and here you are. The original suggestion was that I write something that they could read in appreciation of your religious listening to pipe dreams over the years. And I thought, well, it's not that far from St. Paul. Why don't I go over? And I thought I could give you CDs, 4 CDs that we have released as pipe dreams. No, you don't have to take them. I'm going to put them back in the box. There's a whole bunch more. I could give you these, and I do give you these because inside are booklets which have wonderful stories that go with each of the pieces. So you can pretend that when someone reads them to you or when you read them, you're seeing a hairy guy with a beard that sounds like me reading to you. And there's some wonderful stories and some wonderful music too. There are also here 18 other CDs that are copies of Pipe Dreams programs from past years. There was a point at which there was one station that didn't get the satellite feed from public radio and needed us to supply them with a source. So when they were done, they sent them back to me. I was surprised to get these cartons filled with compact discs, but now I have someone to pass them on to. And there are some other recordings here that I hope you will take some pleasure in, but I hope someone's feeling strong because this is a whole box full of stuff. And I hope you take some. Well, it's between the 2 of you, or the 3 of you, or the 4 of you as it is. We have 2 children and a grandchild, right? Yeah. Yeah, you'll have to fight them. Yeah. There's one last piece, and this, in a way, is sort of the grandfather of the 2 that preceded it, because César Franck, who played at the relatively modest parish church of Sainte Clotilde in Paris, received there a new organ built by a gentleman named Aristide Cavaillé-Coll, who was the principal builder of pipe organs in France in the latter part of the 19th century. And Franck was, although I'm not really sure what the record is of his relationship with his priest, but he stayed there for some 4 decades. Unlike Vierne, who died at the console, Franck sadly expired perhaps a little before his time. He was out walking and got hit by a bus, and though he did not die on the spot, he got pleurisy and eventually succumbed. But at the end of his life, he wrote 3 pieces. They're called Corrals, which are in every organist's repertoire. He never got to hear them played on an organ, but his student, Charles Tournemire, played them with him at his home on the piano, with Tournemire playing the pedal part in the bottom of the keyboard. These pieces are unique insofar as in relative compact space. They last about 14, 15 minutes each. They explore the resources, the rich resources of the Cavaillé-Coll organ, the dramatic impact, the poetic potential, and contrast usually either a busy or a majestic theme with one which is more spiritual and transcendent. And then at the end of each of the pieces, those two themes are combined. So listen to how this piece begins grandly, and then it steps back, and there's another theme. And then listen to how they blend together at the end of the piece. Since it's 15 minutes long, I'm going to sit this one out. But Elaine Mann, it's your turn again. Brava, Elaine, Paul, thank you both. Let's give a hand to our two soloists today for providing us this marvelous music. So Charlie, unless you want to get up there and play, want to give a sermon? No? Thank you for being, because without you, we would not have been able to enjoy this marvelous music today. So thank you so much, sir. Unless someone else has something to say, I don't think I do. Charlie can listen to the CDs of me until he gets very sick of it, and the rest of you, thank you for coming today, and enjoy the afternoon. It's been a beautiful day. I hear organ music all over the place, but it's kind of wonderful to sit, not have to be responsible for anything, and to watch the musicians play. I've known Elaine for some while now, but I've never been here to Grace Church before, and the Schlicker Organ Company is a builder from out east where I'm from, Pennsylvania. They're from Buffalo, New York. I'd never heard this instrument before, and I wasn't entirely certain how it was going to do with Franck, but I think it does beautifully, Elaine. It's really a wonderful organ, and it suits the space perfectly. Thank you so much for hosting us, Grace Church. We appreciate your friendship. You're welcome. My happy.